Hello everybody, welcome to Talk with House. I'm Todd.
I'm Juana.
Okay, today's video, we are going to talk about what happens to the real estate market in election years and the years right afterwards.
Yes.
Okay, this is not political. This is not about who wins. This is just in general what happens.
Right.
And because every 4 years we have this, and what we're talking about is the presidential election years.
Right.
It's presidential. So every 4 years, and there's definitely something that happens, and you'll see this trend.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll go over those.
Okay. Sounds
All right?
good. Okay.
Okay. So let's just start with slides. We got a bunch of slides. Now, we didn't make these slides. These slides came from a you used them in your office meeting, didn't you, or something like that?
Actually, I saw them on somebody else was presenting the slides.
Okay. All right. So here's the first slide. This is the seasonal drop in sales. It says it sharpens during presidential election years. So non-presidential election years from October, November, new home sales drop about 10%. Mm-hmm. That's just the drop in that time of year. Presidential election years from 63 to 2019, they dropped 15%. Mm-hmm. So they dropped more in presidential election year. Now what was interesting was there was a stat on this that this difference in presidential election years gets made up over the next few months.
Right.
So why is that, Juana? Tell me about, people sort of hold their breath, right, for the couple of months.
Right. So we have like the last 6 months of the year that we have the presidential election where people are holding their breath. And then depending on what happens with that election, either things kind of go gangbusters at the very end of the year, or they don't. But either way, what happens in the first 6 months of the year post-presidential election is called a honeymoon period, right? So basically everybody gets a pass, economy kind of gets going, and people are full of optimism and go out and engage in all kinds of economic activity. Okay.
This next slide. Now this shows that home sales went up. Now this is not home prices. This is the total number of homes sold. That 9 of the last 11 presidential elections, but actually the last 8, home prices went up. So here's the stat. So in 1980, there were 2.9 million, and there were only 2.4 million. But remember, 1981 was a pretty bad recession.
Very bad recession. You know, there was a lot of turmoil in 1980. Remember, we were coming back off the high gas prices of the 70s. Yep. We've got inflation. We've got a recession. We've got the whole thing with the hostages. So there's just a whole lot of stuff going on in 1980.
Okay. 1984, they went up. 1988 to 89, remember, we entered that little recession in 1989. And then what's interesting here is every year after, so every year since the basically 1992 election, the next year, the number of sales went up. It's highly likely, because this was a super depressed year for sales, highly likely next year there'll be more homes. Like literally, I'm betting 90% to 10%. There'll be more homes sold next year than this year. What do you think?
Right. So I agree with you, and I've said this before, that I'm expecting more transactions in 2025 than in 2024.
Right. What's interesting too about this, in 2005 there was that 7 million. Remember, that was a hot year. The housing market had kind of exploded. What's also interesting is 2009. Now remember, that was a great financial crisis. There were more homes sold than the previous year, but the previous year there were only 4.1 million homes, which is a pretty low number. And home prices had gone down, but there were more homes sold. So I thought that was super interesting. Okay. This was a quote from a residential appraiser and housing analyst. An election year does not alter the price trend that is already happening in the market. So what that means is it doesn't matter which candidate ends up getting elected. There's other forces.
Right.
Like the candidate doesn't really matter if, like, they can't magically change housing. Like, it's really housing supply and demand, and they can't really change either of those, right?
Right.
Right. Okay. With that being said, now we have the prices. This is the one you're all going to like. This is pretty eye-opening here. Okay. Existing home prices went up after 7 of the 8 last presidential elections. And you can see that now the only one they didn't was 2009, great financial crisis. They went from 196 median to 172. It was when home prices crashed, right? They declined significantly. But Juana, I mean, honestly, if I picked random 9 years and then told you to look at the next year, like chances are 80-90% of the time or more, home prices would be up the next year. If I just picked a random year, 1949 or 1961, right? The next year, home prices would be a little higher, right?
Yeah, because over time, real estate increases in value.
So the fact that they tie this to election year doesn't really mean anything, does it? Or is it just, it's coincidental?
I think partly coincidental, partly because everybody's talking about the election, so they put together this slide deck to play into that.
Yeah, I think so too. Okay, so here's the next one. New home prices went up after 10 of the last 11 presidential elections. 2009 was the only one. We remember that year pretty well. We were selling bank-owned homes.
Mm-hmm. So it makes sense that new home prices would go up for a couple of reasons. One, over time real estate increases in value. Two, just basic inflation. So if you just have basic inflation, the price of construction of goods and services is going to increase, so new home prices will also increase. That's not particularly exciting or novel.
Right. Yeah. This basically what this shows is that real estate prices tend to go up. Mm-hmm. Right. Except for the 1 year the housing crash. Okay. Here's an interesting one. Mortgage rates decrease leading up to 8 of the last presidential elections. It's so here's the data here. You can just kind of look through it. Only in 1980, 1992, and 2016 did mortgage rates go up. Look at what's interesting. Look at 1980. They went from 12.19 to 14.21.
Ow.
If there were crash bros back then, they were probably talking about the housing. Remember, we just showed you the chart. Remember, home prices went up, right? Remember, and then, yeah, so, and look at these interest rates. 1984, 14.67 to 13.64, they went down a little bit. But these, you can see over time what interest rates have done. They've gone from 14 to 12 to 10 to 8 to 6 to, basically into the threes. And then 2020, 2.77%. But, what's interesting is, so I just read this thing today where the median 30-year fixed for Fannie Freddie type products is 6.4. It's under 6.5. It's dropped substantially. There's some VA rates at like 5.8 or something.
Well, I saw some jumbos at 5.8 too.
Yeah, which is pretty crazy because we were back up of 7 a few months ago, and not only were we back above 7, but we had people saying, "Oh, they're going to go to 8 or 9 now," and that never happened.
Nope.
Okay. What do you think about mortgage rates over the next year?
I think they're going to go down. I think most money says that when the Fed meets in September, they will do a quarter point adjustment down. I don't think it's going to be more than a quarter point because I think more than that would be too much of a shock to the market. And I think they're going to continue this policy of dropping interest rate periodically over the next basically 12 to 18 months. This is not particular news to anybody who's been watching what's been going on. I think this has been very clear. I think Chairman Powell has made that very clear as well. He didn't drop rates today or this week because the numbers weren't quite there. But I think by September, the numbers will be there. And I think the number one thing that they're going to be looking at are the jobs numbers. The job numbers already came in lower than expected this week. And they'll come in, they'll be revised again, of course, by September. And they are generally revised down. So I think the concern for a recession is going to be very real. I think this is probably the start of a slight recession. I don't think it's going to be a substantial one, but I think this is a start of maybe a recession. And I think this is what he's been looking for in order to go ahead and get interest rates going back down. Now, I know that he's also been looking at inflation, but he's also looking at the economy overall cooling down because he's trying to kind of get the best of both worlds. As he said before, he's looking for that soft landing, and I think I think by dropping interest rates in September, he will probably have nailed that.
Yeah. And for those people, we had somebody in the comments who commented saying, oh, well, as soon as the recession happens, there'll be all these job losses. And then those people will be forced to sell. So if you had a 2.5% interest rate and you're paying $1,100 a month and you lost your job, would you sell your house so you could go rent and pay $2,200 for the same house?
No, that doesn't make a lot of sense. But look,
you would just get another job.
Right.
Okay.
So I don't think the job losses are as much of a concern. I think what's more of a concern is the sentiment of consumers, because they've been so punished by inflation that even though their wages have gone up, inflation has outpaced their wages, and they've been beat up for a long time by inflation. I think that consumers are finally getting pretty tired, and I think that's what's causing the economic slowdown, probably more than anything else. I do recognize that the job numbers are important, and I'm not making light of that, but I think that the consumer sentiment is more powerful than that, because consumer sentiment drives the U.S. economy. Call it what you want, but consumer sentiment is just so super important for the U.S. economy. I mean, we can talk about the debt, we can talk about spending, we can talk about all these things, but consumer spending, I think, is the cornerstone of the U.S. economy.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, here's a quote. This was a quote from the article. For most Americans, election results will have little direct effect on their income and therefore should not significantly impact their decision to buy or sell a home. Now, we've seen the numbers historically. There's 85% of the time home prices go up from the election year to the next year. Mm-hmm. We just did the video with Bank of America where they're basically said home prices are going to keep going up 4 to 5%. And then they also literally said the housing market would be stuck, it'd be frozen. There wouldn't be people willing to sell. Do you think that's realistic that home prices will go up next year like they do 85% of the time?
Right. So I expect home prices to go up for a number of reasons. Number one, because they traditionally do go up. Number two, interest rates will be lower, which means it will bring even more buyers into the housing market to competing for an insufficient amount of inventory. Number three, there have been people who have been waiting for a long time to come back at the housing market. And again, that's going to put more pressure on housing. We're continuing to create more households. That will put more pressure on housing. So all these things to put together will act as a catalyst for future price increases because of excess demand versus supply.
Okay, here's the big magical thing.
Yes.
Okay, this conversation sort of went, hey, interest rates could be below 6 by the end of the year, into next spring if they're in the 5s. We're talking about 30-year conventionals, right? What would that do? And one of the comments I heard was, well, 1 million extra houses would come on the market as people would start to decide that they're time to sell their house and buy another house. And when those 1 million houses hit the market, that'll really crush housing prices because all the homes. So talk about that one. And does that even make sense?
Well, so unless those 1 million people who are putting up their homes for sale are participating in the renewal from Logan's Run.
Yes, renewal.
Then
Carousel.
Carousel, thank
yes.
you. Then these people are going to have to be home buyers, right? Because they're going to have to live somewhere. Even if they're not going to buy a home, fine. They're going to go out and rent. Well, somebody's going to have to buy a home for them to rent.
Right.
So all they're doing is trading one home for another. So that's just creating those 1 million transactions, whatever. And that's fine. That's great. But it doesn't actually add a net number of homes to the market, because if you're selling one and buying another one, then the net of that is zero.
Yeah, but that was his whole case, was that they would sell their house to buy another one, and it's like, well, where are they going to get the other one from? There'll be all these houses to pick from. They'll just trade. It'll be like a big thing. So you'll have more sales, but there won't be any new. I mean, the bottom line is that until you get more building of homes, and you can satisfy the number of people that we're adding to the country and births and household formations, you simply have an imbalance between supply and demand. And that supply and demand imbalance is called shortage. And in shortage, home prices or price of the good or service tends to go up. In this case, it's housing. So they net don't do anything. But what you will have is more buyer demand. You have more people that either deciding to buy or it'll be good for real estate. It'll be good for us if people want to sell. Like really, that's the best thing we want is for people to sell.
Right.
Because that's what we do. We sell people's houses. You just had a closing today in a house. And so it's very fun to help these people through the process. We've done over 3,000 times. Now it's gotten to the point where we can do it super easy. But okay, so what's the final? I'll let you wrap up the video here. So the bottom line is we have an election coming up. I know it's super contentious and people are very polarized.
All elections are contentious.
Yeah, but I think this one, everybody is saying if the other candidate wins, like literally, we're going to turn into Venezuela or some crazy thing is going to happen.
Okay, but they said that 4 years ago, and they said that 8 years ago, and I'm sorry, I've lost the capacity to be impressed by all that talk.
Right.
The bottom line is for, all of us, and I don't mean most of us, I mean all of us, what's going to happen the day after election? Unless you're actually working on one of those presidential campaigns, everybody else, we're going to get up in the morning, go to work, go to the grocery store, pick up the kids from school, make dinner, have our lives, okay? It's not going to make any difference to any of us. That's the reality. As far as my closing, my little closing thing, I love charts. And I like this. So I want to thank you for letting us do this video because I really, really want to do this video. The bottom line of elections is that they're fun, they're interesting, they're amusing, they're boring, they're annoying, they're all of those things. Yeah. But they don't really impact most of our lives most of the time. So live your lives, make your decisions regarding your homes and regarding everything else in your life based on your particular situation, and don't worry about the things you can't control. Okay?
Yep. So I agree with that.
So hope you made it to the end of the video. Please remember to leave us your real estate related comments, like the video, subscribe, hit the notification bell, share the video, and we'll see you on the next video. Bye.
Bye.